right, guys, so I'm going to quickly introduce you guys to some of our missionaries that we support. So in the email that you guys will get from me today, it talks a little bit more about this family that we support, but today you're going to hear from our very own. So when you guys give a certain portion, 10% of our money that we receive, we go out and we support different missionaries. Morgan Cash, a lot of you guys know the Torgesons and some of the other local communities, but today you're going to hear from our very own Abby and Jason Torgeson. Am I saying that right? Torgeson? Okay.
You did. That was
great. All right, awesome. All right, let's give them a hand.
Well, first off, test. Oh, first off, I just want to say that was not my intro song. I'd asked for Barbie Girl, but they did their own thing. So thank you, Ashley, so much. Thank you for all the work you did getting us set up this morning. Just want to say thank you, and let's start off with a little bit of Spanish this morning. How many of you guys are ready? Wow, we were a little late. Buenos dias. Perfect. Hey, I am Jason. This is my boss, Abby, or my wife, otherwise known as my wife. We have 3 kids. Pastor just recently introduced us as the missionaries are here, and there are 3 terremotos, which is 3 earthquakes in Spanish. So we're not sure how to take that, but it worked out. This is actually our 3rd time here. The first time we were here, Josiah decided to take it upon himself. So I believe he was 1. And he decided to take it upon himself to introduce you guys to your church. And he kept opening the door and welcome, as he was 1-year-old opening the door to your church. So we've shared that story as we've gone around to the different churches to say this church was a special church in the sense of we had our son that introduced, and he has not stopped talking since then. The second time was in 2019. Both Pastor Bob and us had the same look in our eye. He had only been here 3 weeks, and we had just learned that we were having twins. So we had a very similar overwhelmed look of like, what are we doing? But this time, I just want to say thank you again to Ashley for all the work that she did to help get everything in the bulletin. We almost changed the message up, and then Abby said, oh, we told Pastor Bob that we were going to preach on this or we were going to share this. And so we decided to stick with that so everything would line up. But I just want to give a huge shout out to Pastor Bob. I believe he is up in the mountains. Hopefully he's not soaked. And I heard he just had a birthday on Friday. So when he comes back and you see him, make sure you wish him a happy birthday. I thought about making us all sing, but we won't embarrass him too much today. Just want to share what we're going to do is we'll go to the next slide. We're going to share a little bit about our stories. This is our family and my wife and I and our 3 terremotos. And that was actually at one of our churches not too long ago. So it's actually one of our more recent photos.
Hard to get a photo with 3 children looking and smiling.
She's actually referring to the 4th child because I tend to do random things. But we'll just share a little bit about our story, and then we'll tell about the ministry, kind of what we're doing, and then ways that you guys can get involved through prayer, through just helping us doing your job that what we would love for you guys to do right here in your community. My life, I grew up. How many of you guys are military? Anybody have connection to military? We're really close to the base, so I figured that was pretty good. I decided not to wear my hat inside because my roots came back that says you don't wear your hat in church, especially in the sanctuary. But I grew up as a military brat, so most of you guys know what that is. Anybody that's military dependent is considered a military brat. And so we moved constantly. Everywhere we moved constantly. And our number 1 rule in our household was do not lose your military. Thank you. Yes, you do not lose that because that's not a good thing. I think now it's a little bit different, but back then you had Social Security numbers and everything else on there. But as I grew up as military, we were not part of a church. If anything, it was always the Mormon church that always would find us, and within 2 weeks of us moving to a new location, they'd be knocking on our door. And that kind of sparked a whole series of events where a gentleman named Josh Harrison, my sister had gone to youth group, and she took fancy to this guy, and they started talking, and they just were friends, and wanted to be more friends. But he was a believer. She started going to church. She became saved, got baptized, and then she called off the engagement, and they moved their separate ways. Which is a little sad story, but we'll wrap it around here in a second. So as I was growing up. one of the days I woke up and I thought, I thought I had it all. I was working I was working at a movie theater. I had a dream job. It was perfect, making $4.25 an hour. I could get all the movies I wanted, all the popcorn I wanted. And eventually I came home one day and I said, there's something more to life, and I'm going to go to college. And I remember telling my family that I was going to go to college, and laughed. Said, Jason, we're not college people, and you barely made high school. You failed Spanish class. I'll tell you, the Spanish teacher that kicked me out of her class. I'm now here still trying to learn Spanish, truth be told. But as I went to basic training, they take your hair, they take your freedom, but sitting in a room in basic training with 900 other recruits, all bald, homesick, holding hands, singing Amazing Grace, being a part of the church, was kind of that seed that planted for me. And when I done with basic training, went to tech school, or AKA party school, you get all your freedoms back. And it's just as I was going to go the other direction, to go back out hanging out with people and go the same way that I was before, there was a guy named Josh Harrison that got stationed at the same base as me. And he found me. He checked me off every base, walked alongside me, mentored me. Despite the fact that their relationship never worked, he still found value in walking alongside me. And it was an absolutely incredible opportunity to be mentored by somebody in that capacity. It wouldn't be the same without technology issues. And so there was really after accepting Christ, there was two key events that led me to kind of where I'm at right now. The first that I would say was there was a motorcycle ride that I went with a buddy in Washington. We went to this big gathering, and as we were coming around the corner, my buddy has a tendency of not paying attention, and he kind of falls off, and then he catches up doing like triple digits right up behind me, and I'm always thinking like he's going to run into the back of me. Come around a corner, and traffic just stopped. So I locked my brakes, slowed down, look in the mirror thinking, here he comes, and I saw him coming around the corner. Fortunately, he was able to stop. Unfortunately, the motorcycle behind a van was not able to stop, lost control, and bounced down the road. And I could hear his head thumping. With my helmet on, I could hear the thump. It was almost I could feel it. And I parked the bike. I ran back there. There was already a retired medic there holding on to him. I'll spare you the details, but it was not looking good. He was convulsing, and we ended up rolling him over, and the guy starts praying for him. And I'm sitting there thinking, what do I do? What do I do? And I don't know. This guy had been praying for like 20 minutes or 20 seconds, and I thought, oh, I should be praying. So I started praying for him. I was saying, Lord, take him, be with him, comfort him, let him know you in these last moments. And after about 30 seconds, I realized the guy that was praying for him was praying God would heal him. I was praying God would take him. And that was the second 2x4. Oh, my doubt that God could heal this guy. So I start praying God would heal him, and then he stopped moving. So I looked at the medic and looked at each other, put her head down, and just said, that's the end. And he opened his eyes, looked at me, took his helmet off, and started having a conversation with us. And I just thought, wow, what an incredible experience. Do you know how long it took me to forget that story? About a week. Went back to my way, same old thing, went back to the same old thing, and just forgot about it. The second one that I would talk about real briefly was a mission trip when our home church was going on a trip down to Costa Rica, ironically. And I just said, what I heard was, Jason, you are so gifted, so talented. We need you on this trip to come and save the people and build this building. The truth of the matter was, hey, you got one more spot. Put your deposit in if you want a spot on the team. You can go. Or we'll decide if you get to go. I went. It was an absolute incredible experience. I won't go into all the detail after service. If you want to know a little bit more about each of our stories, you can kind of ask that, and I'll share a little bit more. But it was kind of a pivotal moment for me just to be able to see how God was working in the local community, but also the global community. I realized I probably should have said there was 3 key events that result in why I was here.
Yeah, you forgot someone important. So my story is pretty different from Jason's. I grew up in a pastor's home. My dad's a pastor, my grandparents, great-grandparents, and so it was kind of a heritage that I couldn't get away from. And yet as I was growing up, I never really wanted to go into ministry for myself. I felt like I wanted to go to law school, and that was going to be my path. But ultimately, God led me to seminary. And as I started in seminary, I said, all right, fine, I will go into ministry, but I will not be a missionary. And as I was wrestling in that process, I did end up enrolling in the missions program, but maybe with this idea of staying in the U.S. and, helping other missionaries and not actually being one myself. But as a part of that program, I had to do an internship. And through a series of events, I ended up doing my internship in Bogota, Colombia. And while I was there, I said, okay, this is it. This is where I'm supposed to go. This is what I'm supposed to do. And for the first time in several years, I stopped fighting God on that call. And I was super excited about Colombia. I came back to the U.S. I finished up my seminary degree and got ready and moved to Colombia. But before I could go to Colombia, I had to spend 4 months in language school in Costa Rica. I already had majored in Spanish, but just needed a little bit more. And I got to Costa Rica, and everybody talked about how wonderful this country was, and I hated it. I didn't like the country. I didn't like the school. I didn't like the church. I didn't like the neighborhood. And a lot of it, as I look back, I know were things that I was personally going through and processing at the time. So I was grateful in the sense that by the time I got to Colombia, I had kind of gone through all that just messy emotional processing that you have to go through. And I got to Colombia, and I was fresh, and I was ready, and I look back on Costa Rica like, okay, I'm glad I got that over with over there, and I never want to go back to that place again. And the only thing that had seemed good at the time was a couple by the name of Harry and Julia Noctegal, who were really kind to me while I was there, and they picked me up every Sunday and took me to church. And Harry had this reputation of being a matchmaker, and so every once in a while he would talk to me about some nice young man who'd been on a mission trip to Costa Rica, and yeah, whatever, I don't even remember who they all were, but I would kind of ignore him. And as I got to Colombia, Harry every once in a while would write to me an email and checking in, how's it going? I'm praying for you and praying for your ministry, and oh, there's this missions director in Washington State, you should send him your newsletter, and maybe the church will support you, and oh, by the way, he's single. Like, I don't care. This is a ministry contact. I don't care if he's single or married or 95 or green. I mean, it doesn't matter to me, And but over time, Harry starts to get a little more persistent when I wasn't getting the hint. And, you'd be this great ministry couple and you should get married. And here's the date that you should get married. And he got really over the top. And so finally, it just became this awkwardness of like messages back and forth. I'm so sorry about my friend Harry. Oh, that's okay. I know how he is. And then, as it turns out, Harry was right. And so Jason and I, that's a whole other testimony I could share another time, how we were able to meet in person and start our relationship. And as a part of that, we said, okay, well, if we've got a future and we're going to get married, one of us should probably move. And so it made sense as I was wrapping up the commitment I had made to Colombia for me to go back to the U.S. and move to Washington where he was living. And so as we started life in Washington, Jason at that time had wrapped up his work with the church, was working in law enforcement, and he had this weird schedule with, sometimes he's off and sometimes he has vacation in October when nobody else does, and he's up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I said, okay, fine, if we're going to build a foundation for our relationship to do missions, which was our plan, I'm going to build this relationship as fast as possible, which, as anyone would know, is not a good way to start a marriage. And so it was a struggle for me adjusting to life in Washington and just trying to get this season of life over with so we can hurry up and get back overseas. And during that time, we were attending Cornwall Church in Bellingham, Washington, and our pastor was preaching on a verse that's very familiar to all of us, Jeremiah 29:11, where he says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And it was at that time that he explained to us, it's not just this verse, which is really nice. It's a nice verse. It's a nice little wall plaque. It's a nice one to learn. But the context of it is people who were living in exile, people who were living in a place where they did not want to be. And they were also trying to just run out the clock, like, let's get this done so we can get back to where we actually want to be. And what did God tell them in the larger context, which I don't have on the screen? He said, plant your gardens, marry off your sons and daughters, settle in because you're going to be here a while. And what's more, seek the welfare of the city to which I have called you into exile, for if it prospers, you too shall prosper. And I really took that as a challenge, like, okay, I don't know how long this season's going to last, whether it's a few months or several more years, but God has put me here in this time, in this place, to be a blessing to the people that are here in Washington. And it wasn't terribly long after that we started talking about going back overseas and where are we going to go, and Costa Rica comes up in the conversation, and you can imagine how all that went over. And, and so as I'm driving down the road one day, I feel God saying, okay, Abby, you fought me on the call to ministry. You fought me on the call to missions. Do you know what this feels like yet? Yes. So I went to Jason, I think we're going to Costa Rica. And it's even as we were preparing to go to Costa Rica and figuring out what that was going to look like, about that time, the office was talking. The office in Anderson was talking with us about there was not a regional coordinator for Latin America. The regional coordinator is the person who is over the missionaries, over the projects, and works closely with the national leaders. And a good friend and mentor of ours who had at the time worked in the office said, "Yeah, I threw your name into the ring." I was like, "Why? Like, we are really new, and what, does nobody else want this or what?" And so I don't know why, but for whatever reason, the office decided to start talking with us. And so even as we were preparing to go to Costa Rica, they also started talking with us about this regional job, which now has been changed to being called the Regional Connectors. And so we serve as what's called the Regional Connectors for Latin America. We live in Costa Rica, but we work with all 20 Spanish and Portuguese-speaking countries south of the border. So as a part of that, we'll get into a little bit more about what that looks like. But as a part of that, we work with the team of Global Strategy. Global Strategy is just the name of the missions arm of the Church of God. And as a whole team, our goal and our focus is, if you go to the next one, to walk along, this is a long mission statement, I won't read the whole thing, but to walk alongside the local church globally is our area of focus. Walking alongside the local church globally, because sometimes with missions we have this concept that missionaries are the ones who go out there and they pioneer on the front lines of the Gospels, and there are missionaries who do that. But in the Church of God, particularly where we live, the church is over 100 years old. The churches are strong, that we learn from them every single day. And so what our area of focus is not to go in and tell all those people over there what they should be doing, but to say, how is God calling you in your community, in your country, in your context, and how can we walk alongside you? How can we support you in that to help you do it better? And so that's really the goal and focus for our missionary team in Global Strategy. And it looks a little bit different for every missionary. If you talk to someone in Europe, you talk to someone in Africa, you talk to other missionaries in Latin America. But in our particular role, we get to walk alongside three groups. We walk alongside our missionaries, we walk alongside our national leaders, and we walk alongside our partner churches.
Great. We'll go to the next slide here. So we want to talk about the missionaries. This is our beautiful team. We're super excited about. We have the Todds that are serving in Brazil. They've got 2 kids. And Brazil is the fastest church planting. They're probably planting more churches just in Brazil than the entire rest of our region. It's just they are on fire with planting churches, and they are doing it on their own initiative. We've got a couple of projects to help out in some areas, but they are just absolutely knocking out of the park. We have the Curley family that's in Paraguay. That is a fascinating story. If you know the Curleys or ever heard of the Curleys, if you haven't, that will be a story for later that I can tell another time. They are doing fantastic work. We'll see them this year. They're going to be hosting our team get-together in Paraguay. The Belize are our oldest serving, I shouldn't say oldest, they are our longest serving missionaries. They are over 30 years in Belize. They're originally from Guatemala, and they are doing work. If you ever want to know a missionary that is working with over 30 different denominations, it's them. They have built bridges between all. And many of you guys know what the Church of God, it was not established as a denomination. It was established as a movement. Yes, correct. And so the idea of working with other denominations and other groups was exactly what D.S. Warner had in mind when this process got started. The newest members of our team is the Richies. We'll talk a little bit about them on the next slide. I believe we got another photo of them. We have the Honeycutt, Deborah Honeycutt, a.k.a. her house I nicknamed the Sweat Box because it is solid wood and it is the hottest place I have been other than Haiti. But she is the hardest working, and her mom, who is, I think, in her 80s, is still out mowing her lawn. I mean, it's in their genes. Like, I was like, if I could bottle that and take it, I would do it. Maybe I'd get my hair back. The Joneses are serving in Bolivia. I just got to see them in Peru and Bolivia. I got to go down there. They're doing a new work in Tarea, and it is absolutely amazing. Took 2 guys from our home church down, got to connect up with them, see a couple different ministries, and went and finished it off at Tarea, where we went out into this remote village. I don't have a picture of it, but we went out into the remote village, and we were following the pastor. He was driving a 1968 Toyota Corolla, and the mud was about 4 to 6 inches deep. This guy was pumping the brakes to lock up the rear axle to be able to do posi track so that he could slide through this mud, as we were in a Land Cruiser running behind him, and we were still slipping all over the place, although I blame that on Paul, his driving, but that's a different story. But we got to this remote village. It was about 6 miles, and it took us 2.5 hours to get there. it was just a remote village. We had 7 people that accepted Christ and were baptized in the river that we built a dam to block up the water to be able to baptize these people in this remote village. Absolutely incredible opportunity. We'll go to the next slide. The Richies are our newest members of the team. They are our youngest members of the team. You can say youngest, you can't say the oldest. But we are super excited about them because they are highly, highly relational people, and they are just so eager to learn. They're going to be joining us in Costa Rica. We're going to be walking alongside them to train them up to be able to get them to run more of our groups and our teams. So if you're interested in team, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we are super excited about them. They are showing all the old people how easy it is to raise funds, as they are like already almost at 80%, and it's been less than a year. So we're a little jealous. We'll go to the next slide. So as Abby said, we walk alongside our missionaries. We also walk alongside our national leaders.
So this role looks pretty different in terms of walking alongside national leaders. That can look different from day to day. One of the groups that we walk alongside is called the SEED, which is a long acronym in Spanish for an international elected body of 3 leaders that are helping to unify the region and cast a vision for Latin America. And so we've been trying to support them as they rise into that role of leadership. If you go to the next one. Another thing that we get to do is whenever there's projects that come through projects that receive funds through our office in Anderson, we are, of course, the accountability and get to sometimes have fun conversations with the bank, like, you changed your SWIFT code, can we let the office know what that is so we can actually do the transfer? You know, really exciting things to post on Facebook, but important logistical details to keep things operating. But we also get to serve as kind of the liaison for the disaster relief funds that come from our office if there's an earthquake or hurricane or things like that happen in the region. One of the ones that happened recently that's just a phenomenal story. It was a terrible situation. In the month of February, there were some wildfires in Chile to the point that, just destroyed thousands and thousands of acres of land, and entire neighborhoods were engulfed. Highways, as people were trying to flee and evacuate, just swept across, and people not able to get out of their vehicles in time. Just an absolutely tragic situation. And we have a church in one of the cities that was affected. The exact part of town where the church is, thankfully, was spared, and so none of our church members lost anything, but they all knew people who did. They all had friends and relatives and family members that had lost everything or lost loved ones. And the pastor and his wife happened to be out of town at the time that the tragedy struck, but they got back to town very quickly, despite the fact that everyone else was evacuating. They came back and started immediately mobilizing. They said they started with $20 and found some old donations from a Christmas program and started putting things together, and immediately putting together care packages for children and food and supplies. And as we were able to talk with them and get some funds from the Disaster Relief Fund in Anderson, it was phenomenal to see the way that they consistently went out to the neighborhoods. And still, it's now end of June. This happened in February. They're continuing to go out to the neighborhoods. They've started focusing on one neighborhood in particular, the one that's closest to the church, and really, really connecting with people. They wanted to get the church members involved, and some of the church members that maybe didn't have the resources to give financially to it, they used part of the disaster relief funds that we sent to purchase yarn. And they said, we've got ladies in the church that don't have money, but they know how to knit. And so the ladies got together and they started knitting blankets, and it's now winter in the southern hemisphere. And so as people are cold and still haven't rebuilt their homes, they've got blankets knitted by the church ladies from the yarn that was purchased. And so it's really an active church involvement. And now they've been getting involved in the community, keeping up with the families, and they're looking at some long-term relief projects and long-term ministry. And they're already working on a children's event that's going to be held in a couple months now, and really organizing the whole church and using a terrible tragedy to bring hope and to bring light to the community in the midst of a really difficult situation, which was just extremely exciting for us. And another area that we get to work, as you go to the next one, is, as you can imagine, because we work from Mexico to Argentina and everywhere in between, we get to do a lot of traveling. Just this year, we were in Thailand, which is not in our region, but for a regional coordinator meeting. One of the things we like to do when we travel, when we can, is to bring other people with us, because we really have a heart for allowing people to take their blinders off and to understand the power of connection. And so whenever we're able to, we love to travel with other people and recognize that it's not just us that can come in and, bring ideas or resources or whatever, but really bringing people together. And so I traveled to Peru earlier this year, brought a young Costa Rican woman with me. Jason went to Guatemala, brought a few leaders with him for a youth forum. I was able to travel to Cuba in the month of May, which I could tell you Cuba stories all day, but I'll spare you right now. with a couple leaders from Latin America. Jason, as he already mentioned, had his trip to Peru and Bolivia. And we've got some more travel in the horizon. But so it's an exciting opportunity to be able to connect with people on the ground, but really to see people connect with one another. And one of the stories that came out of that is for an international convention that Latin America holds every 2 to 3 years. And the first one that we went to as a family was in Bolivia in 2017. And we were actually the representatives from Costa Rica, despite the fact we hadn't moved there yet, because no one else from Costa Rica made it. And they said, well, you can be Costa Rica's representatives. Okay, I don't know how to speak for a church where we don't live yet, but okay. And so we were there. And so and then in 2019, there was another convention. One pastor from Costa Rica came. And we said, so in 2022, when I went to Brazil, we said, man, we've got to get some more people with us. And so we were able to get 4 pastors to be able to come down, and that was such an incredible opportunity. One of them was a pastor named Armando, who's actually originally from Mexico, but has been in Costa Rica for the past 15 years. And Armando really just thrived. He heard the stories. He took inspiration from the things that he learned because the Brazilian church is so on fire. And we even heard it in his preaching. When we got back to Costa Rica, we could tell he'd been changed. He'd been affected. A few months later, there were some Brazilians who wanted to vacation in Costa Rica. And the missionary sent us a message and said, these Brazilians are coming. And we said, we're actually going to be out of the country. But better yet, let's connect them with Armando. He lives in San Jose, which is where they're going to be. He was just in Brazil. He loved it. He was able to muddle through the Portuguese a little better even than some of the other pastors. Let's connect him. And so I think we were at a meeting in Spain, and I'm getting WhatsApp messages like from Brazil or from the Brazilian missionary with like, yeah, they're preaching in this church. I know that church. That's Armando's church. And so they really started to connect. There's pictures of them at the beach. They had brought Armando and his wife down to the beach. They were preaching in the church. They felt inspired by a project that the church was doing and donated to the church in Costa Rica for this project. And then a few months after that, they invited Armando and his wife to come to Brazil for 2 weeks, paid their airfare, paid their entire expenses for this 2-week trip to Brazil. And Armando shared about how, first of all, it was fun, as you can imagine, and enjoying the connection with other people, but he'd really been going through kind of a funk in his ministry. And he said he was in a season where they called Mondays the Mondays of depression. Because they'd come to church on Sunday and see things that went wrong, or there weren't people there, or just, the numbers were down. And so every Monday he would wake up just feeling down and low and, Lord, what am I supposed to do? And he said he'd kind of get animated through the week, and by Sunday it was better. But he said when he was in Brazil, he saw that the churches had church in the evening. And he thought about his neighborhood. He thought about his context. He said, my church has had church every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock for the past 48 years. Something is not working. What if we try the evening and see if it works? They changed their church time, which for us with little kids is terrible, but for the people who live in their neighborhood, we live further away. For people in their neighborhood, it's fantastic. And they said the entire spirit has turned around. New families have come. The place is revived. And he said it's no longer Mondays of depression because of his experience in Brazil, because of that connection and that ability to take his blinders off and see a different perspective because of that travel. So that's a really exciting thing that we get to do as regional connectors.
So 2 things she didn't share. One, in Bolivia, she was the first female to ever preach out in the camp where there was no electricity. They ran generators, brought cows in, and there was over 10,000 people. And so she was actually the first one to actually preach in Cochabamba. I knew she probably wouldn't share that one.
Thank you, altitude sickness, to the guy who was scheduled to preach.
Yeah, but it was great. It was a great open door. They're a little more conservative in Bolivia. The second thing that I wanted to share is we have, as Abby said about Costa Rica, we didn't have anybody representing Costa Rica. This year in the seed, the
same convention I mentioned, yeah.
We have 17 Costa Ricans coming, and they are paying their way. All of them are paying their own way, paying their luggage. We aren't contributing a dime to it, other than once we get on the field, we'll help them out with some travel stuff. But it's been absolutely amazing to see them take off. The last thing that we like to talk about, our third one that we walk alongside, is our partners. That's you guys. We would not be able to do what we're doing without our churches and our faithful individuals that are supporting us, praying for us, encouraging us, and coming to see the ministry. It's truly a blessing. Most missionaries say, "Oh, don't bring teams. It's a headache." But a lot of missionaries bring teams for money. We bring teams for relation, for us and for the locals, because we've switched it. We flipped it upside down with the mission trips. If you're more interested in mission trips, please come back after service, talk with us, and I can explain a little bit more how we're doing our mission trips. Or if you've been on a mission trip, I'd love to hear your story. I just want to say, what we like to do is we like to pour back into the congregation. We like to be able to pour back into what's happening right here in Colorado Springs. As I have talked about kind of my role, I know God's heart is to have more people in the community of Colorado Springs, more people that could be the medic, not literally, but have the faith to start praying for somebody right away, that somebody else may see, oh my gosh, I should be doing the same thing. And modeling what we should be doing out in the community. And two, Josh Harrisons that are mentors that can walk alongside other people. Who are other people in your neighborhood, in your community, in your life, whether it's family member or whatnot, that you guys can walk alongside and change the spiritual outcome here in Colorado Springs. We're working on it on the global side. You guys can work it on the local side, and we'll share stories, swap battle stories and scars and everything else together down the road. And I also wanted to say, if there's one more thing that we talked about, the missions and whatnot, if that's something that you feel called of a global one, or if you can't go or don't have the desire to go, look to send somebody. Look to help to send somebody else on a short-term mission trip, because I would not be here if it was not for the people in my life and the first short-term mission trip that I went on. The last thing that that we would like to ask from you guys, how many of you guys have cell phones? Okay, I want to see them. I want to see all your cell phones. Pull your cell phones out. Pastor Bob's not here, so it's okay. Well, I won't make you wear a hat, but I want you to pull out your cell phone, activate your camera, if you have a camera. We have a little bit of a competition here to see who can get more people signed up for our newsletter. So you got multiple options. We won't sell your name. We won't sell your information. You can opt out at any time. But what it does is it helps us to stay connected with what's happening here in Colorado Springs, but also what's happening global allows you guys to be able to be ambassadors and connectors as well. Is that if we say, hey, there's this need right here, and you say, oh my gosh, my nephew's just been talking about wanting to go on a short-term mission trip, and he speaks Spanish. And is there any place that we could send a single guide to go for a couple weeks or a month or a year, or, some parents would probably say the next 20 years. But if you can we'll go to the next slide.
Or you can check out your bulletin, yeah.
There's a QR code. You can take a picture of that. That will send you automatically to the newsletter sign up. I promise you it does not sign you up directly from our bank account. It is solely just for the newsletter. You can also, if you're not comfortable with the QR one, you can text this number right here and say Jason Rocks, and just say sign me up for the newsletter. Include your email. And so I will get 100% of the credit for how many people we sign up. Our current record, I think we're sitting at, 20? Yeah, 18 or 20. I always inflate it like a good fishing story. But like I said, what we do is we walk alongside those three areas. I'll pass the microphone, or Abby has her own microphone. She can close us out.
Yeah, so just again, in those newsletters, we try to tell prayer requests and share stories, and also challenge people based on what God is teaching us for how you can continue to serve the Lord in your own context. And as Jason said, if the Lord has stirred anything in you from what you've heard today, whether about connecting with us or connecting with one of our projects or knowing more about the region, we'd love to talk with you more after service about how you can get involved. But I want to close with a verse that I mentioned earlier, one that's very familiar, which is Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." And one of the beauties of being a guest is we don't know everything that's going on in the church or in the community or in the lives of the congregation. But I can imagine there are some of you who are going through an amazing season, like, man, God is doing some wonderful things. I love what's happening in my life right now. And I imagine there are others who are saying, man, I just wish this were not my life at the moment. I don't love the job I'm in, or I'm in a stage of life that's uncomfortable for me. I don't like where I'm living. Maybe I don't want to be here in church this morning, but somebody dragged me here. I don't know. But whatever season you're going through, whether it's what was my kids call the best day ever, or maybe one that feels a little bit more like an exile, the Lord has plans for you right here and right now. But not just for you. Just as the God used the exiles, and we don't have time to get into it or preach a sermon on it, but God used exiles like Esther and Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be the light and to walk alongside the people where he had placed them in that time, in that place, in that season. God has plans not just for you, he also has plans for the people who are around you. He has plans for that neighbor kid, for your own kid, for your grandkid, for the neighbor lady, for the grumpy man at the grocery store. Whoever it is, coworker, friend, church member, God has plans for them as well. So who is that person that God is calling you to walk alongside? Who is that person that God is calling you to encourage? Who is that person that God is calling you to mentor? Right here, right now, in this time, in this place, in this season. And as you walk alongside people in your community, as Jason said, you may be called to walk alongside people globally, but I just encourage you today to open your heart. Who is the person that God is calling you to walk alongside, and how can you be faithful to answer that call? God, we just love you so much, and we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity that you've given us to be here, to praise you, Lord, to hear from your word, to learn about you. Thank you that you are a God who walks alongside us and never gives up on us. Even when we're about to step into a mess or step into our old ways, Lord, thank you that you stir our hearts in a different direction. Thank you that you bring people around us to walk alongside us and to encourage us. And thank you that you have called us as well to be your hands, to be your feet, and to walk alongside the people that you've placed in our path. We just pray that you would help us to be faithful, that you would identify in our hearts right now who is that person, and what is one step that we can take even this week to answer that call. And then I pray that you would give us the boldness and the wisdom to go about it. We love you, Lord, and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.